So welcome to RareWine. Today we're going to talk about one of our favorite subjects. We're going to talk about Burgundy, and we're going to talk about one of the best producers of white Burgundy, and that is Domaine Leflaive from Puligny-Montrachet. I have here with me 4 of their wines. They make a bigger portfolio, but this is the 4 Grand Cru wines that they make. We're going to talk a little bit about them later, but first we're going to talk about the domain in general and the history of the domain. Today the domain has 28 hectares in the Côte de Beaune region, where they have vineyards in Puligny and also a little bit in Merceau. They have recently bought some vineyards also down in the Mâconnais region in Puy-Fusé and Saint-Véran, where they make some very interesting wines, where they have also started with biodynamic farming, and they have 7 hectares down there. And then they have also bought a little bit in the area called Côte de Beaune, which is the vineyards behind the famous Côte d'Or region, where they have the vineyards in Puligny, for instance. So, but the domain was actually started, the story goes all the way back to 1717 actually, where the first written stories was about Leflaive in the Puligny. But the story that we should talk about today, I think, is starting in the beginning of last century, where we had the phylloxera pest that destroyed the vineyards also in Burgundy and all over Europe. But in the 1920s, in that time, Joseph Leflaive, he decided to go out and buy some vineyards, because there was a lot of abandoned vineyards that he could pick up at, let's say, a reasonable price. So that was the domain we know today, was started at that time, where he bought 25 hectares that was added to the portfolio he already had from his family, which was a bit smaller. So that was at that time a good portion that they bought. And after that they really haven't bought that many vineyards, except for this very little, very famous part in the most famous of all vineyards in Burgundy, the Montrachet vineyard, where they bought 0.081 hectares back in 1991, which is just enough to make 1 barrel of wine each year. So that is very, very small production. So, but Joseph Leflaive, he founded the domain in the 1920s, and at that time, after the whole phylloxera problem, they started looking into what kind of rootstock should we put the Chardonnay wines on top of. And they did a lot of research on that and decided on the right rootstocks at that time to really start growing the grapes in Puligny. And that was the time where Domaine Leflaive made its name in that period. And also when he gave over the domain to his 2 children, and they started working with it. So Vincent Leflaive was the next generation that kind of took over, and he made some very important decisions when he was about to give the domain onto the next generation. Because in 1973 he took the decision to change the ownership from a family domain to a company domain instead. And the reason why that is important is that now in 2021 we see a lot of domains struggling with keeping the ownership inside the family, because the inheritance laws of France are so strict. So it becomes very difficult to keep the domain in the family. So because it's a company name, a company domain, then you have it easier to keep it in the family. So today it's actually the great-grandson, Brice de la Morandière, who is the direct descendant from the old Joseph Leflaive. He's taking care of the company today and running it. So, but in 73 they made it this company, and then when we go a little bit further forward, we go up to 86, where something important happened again, because at that time there came 2 new co-managers, and that was Olivier Leflaive, who started in 86, being a co-manager with his uncle Vincent Leflaive, and learned how to take care of the winery. And then when we came up to 1990, and Claude Leflaive, who is a very important figure for the way we look at Domaine Leflaive today, she came in and became co-manager along Olivier Leflaive. And Olivier, he kind of struggled a little bit in the domain because he also wanted to make a négociant business. So Olivier Leflaive actually started a small négociant business mainly because he had some American clients who were looking for Merceau, and the domain didn't have that many vineyards in Merceau. So Olivier Leflaive, he started his négociant business, and after 3 years he decided to leave in 1993 to start up his own business, which started as a négociant business, but today also is a domain where he owns his own vineyards along with the négociant wines. But back to the Domaine Leflaive. When Anne-Claude Leflaive came in, she had the idea that they should make things as natural and with as good biodiversity as possible. So she decided to change the vineyards to biodynamic, and she has actually made a huge change and was one of the pioneers in the Burgundy region for biodynamic wine growing. So she changed it in the vineyards, but she also changed it in the winery. And she actually, one of the last things she did before she passed away in 2015 was to start the construction of a new winery. So today they actually have a winery which is shaped like an egg, because that's the way the energy from the biodynamic feeling goes best into the barrels. That's what they believe. So in this case, we should believe it at least. So, but in 2015, when she passed away, Brice de la Morandière came in, and he was the nephew, and he took over. After a few years, he also changed the winemaker actually at the domain. So Pierre Vincent came in, who used to be the winemaker at Domaine de la Voucherie, who was also a biodynamic winery. So in that sense, it really made good sense. So, but today, they still produce mainly wines in Puligny, little bit in Merceau as mentioned. And I think we should just talk about the 4 different Grand Cru vineyards that they have, because there's no question that Montrachet is definitely the best Grand Cru vineyard, but the production is also extremely small. So this is a wine that you could say both for investment and for drinking, it's a perfect wine. A lot of structure, a lot of power as well. But otherwise, if we take away that barrel, then the Chevalier Montrachet is definitely one of the most important wines with the Domaine Leflaive, because at this vineyard they own actually 1.83 hectares, which is divided in 3 different plots, mainly in the upper part of the vineyard. And the Domaine Leflaive is actually the second biggest owner on this specific vineyard. This is a wine with huge structure, and also a wine that demonstrates how white Burgundy really can age. Then they have the Bâtard, which they actually have a bigger portion of. They have 1.91 hectares, and we just managed to find a nice mature bottle in 1982 in our warehouse. Fortunately at RareWine we have bottles of Domaine Leflaive coming in and out of the warehouse for our trading department a lot. And we also sell these wines especially for our investors, because it's really wines where we see a lot of growth. And we also see an increase in interest for wine lovers and wine drinkers for mature white Burgundy. So it seems like the prices for the best white Burgundies are really going up at the moment. And especially mature versions from Domaine Leflaive and other top producers is really increasing in price in these years. The last one is the Bienvenue Bâtard Montrachet, which is a little bit smaller vineyard, 1.15 hectares, a little bit more elegant wine, a little bit more freshness, but also a fantastic wine. So that's the main 4 Grand Crus from Domaine Leflaive. But I would say if you stumble upon a bottle of Domaine Leflaive, even if it's only a Bourgogne Blanc, then you should definitely buy it, because even the Bourgogne Blanc is made actually from vineyards almost inside the village of Puligny-Montrachet, and the quality is comparable to other good wines from that region as well. So that was the short story about Domaine Leflaive. Thank you for joining us today. Bye bye.